Howdy folks, Nathan Adlin here with Andre, coming at you live from Boulder, Colorado, right here in Gun Barrel. That's right, we are at the office, the headquarters of Cool, and I got Andre next to me, and we are doing a live broadcast, and Andre, tell them what the topic is.
Well, this is our TFLtoday live show that we do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at about 10 a.m. We tried to start a couple of minutes early.
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties.
Yes, a few technical difficulties today, but nonetheless, today's topic is top 6 reasons crossovers are not SUVs and vice versa.
And the other half of that is what makes a crossover a crossover. Yeah. So we wanted you guys to chime in. This is what we're going to do today, which is a little different than what we've been doing. At the end of the broadcast, we're going to try to answer actual questions that you guys have rather than stopping the broadcast and then looking up your questions. It makes things, I think, a little bit smoother.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's get right to it. Now, first of all, before we get started, wanted a couple shout-outs. Anybody out there right now?
Yes, Ethan and Daniel say hi.
Hey, Ethan, Daniel.
And Nigel.
Nigel.
From Thailand.
Hey, awesome.
Hey, around the world, guys. Thank you for joining us. Once again, we're doing this 3 times a week.
3 times a week.
And Avery.
Avery, hi Avery, how you doing?
And John.
10 o'clock in the morning, Mountain Time. That's when we do this, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And there may be changes in the future. This is very new to us, so we're working on it, but we're starting to, I think, get our stride. Now, with that being said, let's get started right away.
Yeah, top reasons crossovers are not SUVs. And the first identifier, what is a crossover, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive system. It has to have that system, in our opinion, right?
Yeah, this is one thing that recently a lot of you guys chimed in on. I had an opportunity to drive the new Toyota CHR. Yeah, it's a confusing name because there's the HRV. And, anyway, the CHR in North America is only available as a front-wheel drive vehicle with a CVT. There is no all-wheel drive option here. As such, I refuse to call it a crossover. I think it's a hatchback that just happens to be high off the ground. If they offer an all-wheel drive system here, then I'll call it a crossover.
Yeah, and well, first of all, crossovers are hot. So you're talking about subcompact.
Mm-hmm.
This is, where the CHR would be if it was a crossover.
Right.
Honda HRV,
mm-hmm.
The Renegade Jeep is a leader in that segment.
Yeah, the Mazda CX-3,
yep.
the Fiat 500X.
Yep.
There's a lot of vehicles in that segment. But the segment was actually kind of sort of started by a vehicle that is no longer here. And it's a shame because it was pretty good. And that is the Suzuki SX4.
I have a picture of it right here. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Suzuki is no longer selling cars in the United States, but Roman and I both had an opportunity to drive. I drove several versions of this car, and even the one that had the CVT, which came along later, was a really good car in the snow. And in terms of its size, it's smaller than a CRV, it's smaller than a RAV4, and it kind of sort of started that segment, but it disappeared before it could get any credit. So there are other vehicles in that same league as well, by the way, including the Mini Cooper, the Countryman.
Yeah, and the 4-door Cooper, just a hardtop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So both of those vehicles qualify for crossover status.
And also, the hottest segment is the compact segment. And this is a segment that's growing the fastest, double-digit growth year over year. And it also sells the most units, basically.
Now wait till we tell you who's number 1 for the month of February 2017.
Yeah, can you guys guess?
They all said Honda CR-V. That's what you said.
But actually, Nissan Rogue is number 1 right now.
Yeah, Nissan is popping the champagne corks because, the segment has been dominated by the RAV4 and the Honda CR-V. The new Rogue, which is a really good crossover, and there are a lot of options you can get, and it's inexpensive, and there's other things about it that are pretty good. But I never expected it to take over those 2 vehicles, especially the new Honda CR-V, which is now being sold, and that vehicle has a turbocharged engine, and it's a better vehicle than the one it replaces. And then if you look at it, first, second, third, and fourth, we have, what is it, the Rogue?
The Rogue is number 1.
Yeah.
CR-V was number 2 in February,
Mm-hmm.
then followed by Ford Escape.
Ford Escape is kicking butt.
Yeah, it was redesigned for 2017, and it's a little bit fresher, but
Updated.
still probably not as complete package as the latest CR-V and some others.
but it is the hot rod of the class. The EcoBoost engine in that thing is absolutely awesome. It's the best part of the vehicle.
Number 4 was the RAV4.
Yeah, which has dropped significantly.
Yeah, it used to be in the top 2 usually.
I think when the new Adventure version comes out, it'll jump up a few notches.
And then finally, the top 5 rounds out by Chevy Equinox.
Chevy Equinox is actually a vehicle that's very popular in rental fleets. They cannot disclose how many of those vehicles were actually sold to rental fleets, but I can vouch personally by saying that almost every single fleet that I've seen has that vehicle. And the bottom line is it's a good idea because that gets you familiar with it, and then you come in as a customer to Chevrolet and buy it. And now there's a new one that's coming out soon.
Yeah, and it's actually, I think, hitting the showrooms like as we speak, the 2018 Equinox, and we hope and we will test it very, very soon.
That's right.
Usually we would show you guys images and some information on the screen behind us, but we had some technical difficulties today, so I apologize about that. But I will show you my screen when we talk about some of these vehicles. And one of the screens I was looking at, we track sales on the Fastlane car, and this is just competition of vehicles. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of crossovers out there, and it's a hotly contested segment. It sells millions of units a year, like 2.5 million units in 2016.
Now, if you look at vehicles that are really popular in the class that are not SUVs or crossovers, I'm talking even things as popular as the Honda Civic or larger, the Toyota Camry, all of these vehicles that used to be dominant, well, now their sales are shrinking, and sales of these crossovers is growing at a huge, just flying right now.
Yeah.
So, basically every single automaker that sells in the United States is trying to come up with crossovers or SUVs to sell in our market. Now, let's go on about what we're talking about in terms of crossovers. And another thing that makes them crossover is higher ground clearance than the cars they may have been based on. So it may only be, what, 1/8 of an inch in some cases.
A fraction of an inch, or maybe an inch. Yeah.
Just enough to visually set it apart, but also it makes it more handy in snow. Having a car that is really close to the ground, like the Subaru Impreza, if you look at its cousin, which is the Subaru XV Crosstrek, it's much higher off the ground and much more utilitarian, and simply put, it's much better to drive in snow and into mud because it's higher off the ground.
Also curbs.
Curbs are awesome because you're higher and you can go over. Trust me, my wife can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But here's the flip side. We're talking about top 6 reasons or top 6 ways what defines an SUV. A crossover, actually. But you have to have all these elements.
Yes.
If you're missing 1 or 2, it's no longer a crossover.
That's right.
Like a VW Beetle Dune.
Yes,
right?
it's a good example.
It has a special name. It has a Dune name. It sits a little bit higher. A few millimeters, because German manufacturers are very precise.
Very precise.
But it doesn't have all-wheel drive.
No, and because of that, we would not consider it a crossover. It's the same thing with that CHR that I recently drove. Once again, no all-wheel drive, no crossover. Another thing, by the way, you guys have mentioned before that some vehicles look kind of silly with cladding and everything else. I agree in many cases, but the whole purpose of that is to make the vehicle look more rugged for your average consumer who wants something that has a little bit more spice to it, or maybe gives them that off-road feel without actually being an off-roader. And so that is another one of our criteria, is having that, the visual pop.
Yeah, the spirit. I think you called it the adventurous spirit, and I agree. And, when you look at the vehicle like the XV, or like the Volvo Cross Country, right?
Yeah.
They have a little bit of a skid plate in the front, and a little bit of different colors, and it stands out and it looks adventurous, and it says maybe a roof rack on the top, right? Just take me out, let's go.
And that's the whole point that they're trying to convey. So you add that to our little formula, and that's another bit of the criteria of being a crossover. Okay.
Number 4?
Number 4 would be it has to be utilitarian. Now this is really simple. Basically, it has to have a usable interior that can hold stuff. It has to be able to come with or have an option for a roof rack, and hopefully even a tow hitch. Not necessarily for towing, but being able to hook up a bike rack on the back of the vehicle. There has to be an option for that. And the bottom line is that you have to be able to do many things with this vehicle. Otherwise, it's not a utility vehicle, which is sort of the whole point of the crossover thing to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to be able to carry things. If
Yeah.
you're going camping, you gotta bring your gear. If you're carrying something from a garage sale,
Yep.
and this is why I think these vehicles are growing in sales, because not only are they all-wheel drive, which is an added security. I mean, it could be just a feeling of security,
Right.
but and convenience of higher ground clearance. Also, how about egress into the vehicle?
Yeah, one of the reasons these things are so popular, if you look at a lot of people out there, they are much more comfortable getting in and out of an SUV or a crossover because you don't have to fall into the car to get in. You basically just scoot your tush over and you're in. I actually recently did a story on the Buick LaCrosse, and one of the things that I noticed were the sales for Buick cars were dropping, whereas in Buick crossovers and SUVs was growing. And part of the reason why, I've been told by many people, is that it's comfortable to get into a crossover and SUV. You just scooch over and you're in. And actually, I could see that point. So,
Yeah. Number 5 on our list is the Lexicon. And
Yeah.
what do we mean by that? I mean, it's the name of the car and the uniqueness of it.
I know this sounds stupid to some of you guys, and I don't blame you for saying, oh, God, come on. But the reason why these guys at public relations for each car company get paid is to find ways to make the vehicle more appealing to you. And one of the things they do is they give it a name of some sort, and you'll notice every single crossover has a unique name or a unique little X or, oh God, they do everything.
But my
cross
favorite
this, cross that.
Yeah, my favorites are not the alphanumeric characters like XC60 or
Right.
XC90, but an actual name, like an Explorer. Okay, so it's actually a front-wheel drive based platform, right? And
Right.
it's a crossover with 3 rows of seats, but the name Explorer means, okay, it's adventurous, you can take it out. Pathfinder?
Pathfinder, yeah, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a kind of funny thing to mention the Pathfinder. I just bought one, an older one.
Okay.
The thing is with both of those vehicles started out as SUVs and then became crossovers. And that kind of shows how the market's moving, and they're selling them. They are really selling them, especially the Explorer. So it's kind of an
Yeah.
interesting point.
And we'll get to some SUVs attributes a little bit later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of you guys are like, okay, wait a minute. Now, what about unit body? Yes, of course, they all have to be unit body. I don't know any crossovers that actually have a frame per se. And then there are some other criteria, once again, we'll get to when we start talking about SUVs.
Yeah.
But the final thing is towing. And it's a murky area because not every crossover tows under 5,000 pounds, but for the most part, a majority of these vehicles tow between 1,500 and 3,500 pounds. That's a majority of them. Some of them go up to about 5,000 pounds, and then there's a couple exceptions that go higher, but only a couple exceptions.
Yeah, for example, the most recent Nissan Pathfinder 2017 was redesigned, and it's actually above 5,000 pounds on towing now, which is good. But what you really need for towing, and we talk about this on our TFL truck channel a lot, is you have to have stability, and frame allows you to kind of distribute the weight from the tongue of the trailer when you put the trailer on, to distribute the weight evenly, to make the vehicle, the tow vehicle and the trailer level for safety, to make sure your brakes are working properly. And when you have a unibody, it's hard to do that as effectively because sometimes it has some flex in it.
Yep, and you can feel it throughout the vehicle. Any shimmy that the trailer exudes, any movement, you really feel it at the seat of your pants with a crossover, whereas with a truck-based vehicle, it's a little bit more isolated, and frankly, it's more secure.
Yeah, and some people say, well, my vehicle is rated at 5,000 pounds, so gosh darn it, I'm gonna tow 5,000 pounds.
Gosh darn it! Oh, listen to you. That was adorable. Sorry.
Thanks. But towing at your limit is also not advisable.
No, it's.
When you overload your vehicle and put it at the max, you're not going to be comfortable.
I always tell people go 10% below your maximum as a maximum, and you'll usually be doing pretty good.
Yeah, but if you're towing like a little trailer, for landscaping, or if you're towing a small sailboat or a hobbycat, a U-Haul, I mean, those are the things that crossovers do great, and that's why they're popular.
That's right. So there are a few, once again, we know there are exceptions, and we're acknowledging those exceptions, but for the most part, this is where we are. Now, here's a funny thing. There's one car company that decided to take a vehicle that could only tow 1,500 pounds, and they jumped it up to 3,500 pounds, and that's Toyota. They have an upcoming RAV4, the Adventure, that will have a much higher towing rating. but the engine's the same, the transmission's the same, the all-wheel drive system's the same. What they've done is they've put in more cooling throughout the engine in order to have the transmission cooling, extra oil cooling, and everything else to make it so it can somehow pull 3,500 pounds. Now, I have towed with a RAV4 about 3 years ago, and it towed about 1,000 pounds, and it was pretty good, but it could feel it. And I'm thinking to myself, 3,500 pounds? Wow, that is interesting. So it's one of the many fun points to look forward into the future, because I have a feeling when we get one, we're going to tow with it.
Yeah, and keep your questions coming.
Yeah.
In about 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to
jump into those questions and start answering
them. I know there's some discussion going on in the chat room, which is great. Thank you guys for doing that.
Yeah, I hope you guys got my tweets, because what we're trying to do is advertise what we're doing a day before, at least kind of the general topic, and so you guys could pick up on it, and then of course join in us. And it's Wednesday and Hump Day. You need something to look forward to, so hopefully you're looking forward to our stuff. Now let's go on to, I think we're going to go into SUVs now.
SUV attributes, yeah.
Okay.
So we went over 6 attributes what makes a crossover, and let's recap real quick.
Yeah.
All-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive system, higher ground clearance, spirit.
Yep.
You know, it has to look the part. Utilitarian.
Oh, you forgot to mention the front wheel drive bias.
Yeah, and these are generally front-wheel drive biased, or they started on a platform that was front-wheel drive.
Was meant for front wheel, yeah.
And then they got the all-wheel drive system.
Yes.
Added. Utility. You have to have utility. It's basically a tall hatchback.
Yeah.
Or a wagon. That's
for the most part, yeah.
Lexicon. It has to have the name. Yes, it's a little cheesy, but the name helps. Identify the vehicle. And then towing. Usually, not a lot of towing in these vehicles, right?
Yeah, just a minimum amount. But they, usually, once again, they're rigged to pull between 1,500 and 3,500 pounds.
Now, on the flip side,
yes,
SUVs.
Different story. Not a whole lot of them out there either. It's a segment that is shrinking, not growing. But there are still vehicles. Now, I bet you guys are asking, well, what about the Jeep Wrangler? Obviously, it's an SUV. It's a very different vehicle, which is one of the reasons why it's in TFL car, not TFL truck. Even though it does have a frame and solid axles, it's unique only to that vehicle. There are no other vehicles that share it. So we're kind of keeping it there and keeping it away from our dedicated trucks. Our dedicated trucks are, for the most part, pickup truck based.
Beds.
Yeah.
With beds.
Or it has a proper frame.
Yes.
Think Ford Expedition, stuff like that.
Chevy Tahoe, truck-based full-size SUVs. And these are basically trucks with a wagon body on top of it. Which is how the Suburban started out. It was basically a truck frame, and they put, a passenger body on it, basically.
And then whammo, that's what you got. And Jeep did that in early days, too.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see where this market's gone. There are dedicated people who will not change the formula. Some of them will only keep a solid rear axle. Others, like Ford, have gone to an independent rear axle. But for the most part, these are vehicles that have a much higher towing rating than anything that a crossover can do. They tend to have a much more beefy feel to them. They tend to be taller because they're on top of a frame. And, frankly speaking, they're built to take a little bit more off-road, and, that's why people modify them and whatnot, because they can handle that type of stuff.
Yeah, and also the second attribute is solid axles. Usually a solid axle in the rear.
Usually.
The Wrangler you mentioned, solid axles front and rear.
Yep.
But another attribute of a crossover is independent suspension.
That's right.
It adds comfort on the road,
mm-hmm.
but it's not always great off-road.
No, and that's the thing. Articulation was one of the main things with solid front and rear axles, which is one thing that Jeep does really well. But I bet you guys are asking, speaking of Jeep, about the Grand...
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
Yeah, the Grand Cherokee.
Yeah.
That's been in a foggy place, and we've...
that's a sensitive subject.
Yeah.
Because the Grand Cherokee started out as a unibody construction
mm-hmm.
with independent suspension.
I think early on it had a solid rear axle.
And people always thought of it as an SUV.
Yeah.
And it's advertised as an SUV.
That's what Jeep calls it, an SUV.
Yes. So that's a sensitive subject. I could go either way. It is a Jeep.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. But right now it does have independent suspension.
Yeah, it's a front engine rear drive based vehicle, though. It's not like a regular crossover with a front drive bias.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And then, frankly speaking, it is in a sort of a murky area. Roman and some other people think that it's a crossover. I tend to think of it as more of an SUV, and I'm sure it's somewhere right in the middle. And there are other SUVs and crossovers that are like that. There's some from Mercedes-Benz and BMW where they have the attributes, some that are from a truck, but others that are from a car. Or
Land Rover, Range Rover. I mean, these are off-road capable vehicles,
yeah,
luxury vehicles, but they don't have a frame per se, especially the most recent versions of them.
that's right. Independent suspension and adjustable and everything else. So is that an SUV or is that a crossover? We're still trying to figure all of that out, and that's why you guys are now posting so many questions here.
Yeah.
And it's about time that we answer them.
Also, low-range systems.
Yeah, that's right.
Systems, usually truck-based vehicles have an actual transfer case, which allows you to gear down.
That's right. And it's either a lever, which I prefer, or it could be a switch or a push button, but there's an actual transfer case that actually does drop down the gearing. Now, if you look at vehicles like the Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk, which says it has a low range, it's actually not a real low range. It's just dropping everything down and it's locking up both the front and the rear, but it's not there's no transfer case that they use. All right, let's get to some questions.
Yeah,
here.
let's do questions. We have about 10 minutes left in the show. We
So-
like to keep them under or around 30 minutes overall. So, first of all, a lot of shout outs, so thank you guys for joining. Will you ever do a long-term crossover in SUV? Well, yeah, of course, we would like to.
We would like to. It's a question of the automakers giving us one. Now, right now, we are doing long-term trucks on the truck channel,
Yeah.
and that's pretty cool. We're pretty happy with that. And so once we're done with that, we may look into doing either a crossover and SUV and asking and bugging the automakers for one.
And we could actually buy one too if it's a used vehicle, which is a little bit more affordable.
Yep.
So if you guys have ideas, let us know. What would be a cool crossover on SUV for us to have a little project with, right?
That's right. And once again, if you put it down in the comments when we're done with the video and it becomes just an actual video as opposed to a live broadcast. Oh, by the way, you may have wondered what happened to our other live broadcasts. Sometimes we've had technical difficulties, which is why it's not saved as a video. Once again, we're still learning about this.
Here's Anthony mentioning 1980s AMC all-wheel drive Eagle.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Solid rear axle, a unique four-wheel drive system, all-wheel drive system, which, by the way, wasn't shared with any other vehicle. It was actually specifically built for that car, I guess you would call it. It is one of the pioneers in that class. But once again, A, it's no longer being built, and B, would I call it a crossover or an SUV? I'd probably call it a crossover only because of the size of the vehicles. I don't think any of them could tow over 5,000 pounds. And quite frankly, they were just in a really unique segment, which frankly was kind of popular, but not crazy popular. But now they're being like bought like total collectors vehicles right now. People are buying the hell out of them.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Some manufacturers were kind of early to the game, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have a great idea, you want to be first, but sometimes you introduce a vehicle and it may be at the wrong time in the overall scheme of things.
Yeah, and you can look at that with, especially with older Subarus and eventually Mitsubishis that came to the States that had options, if not all-wheel drive standard, or a form of four-wheel drive. And AMC is another one. They all were really early to the game, and the popularity wasn't really there. It was still, kind of waning. But now, look at it. Almost every car that's built, almost every single car that's sold, I'd say about 85% of them have some form of all-wheel drive option, or they're the basis of a crossover.
Yeah, and it's going that way. I mean, now luxury sedans have all-wheel drive systems.
Nearly all luxury sedans have all-wheel drive as an option.
There's a few questions about trucks, but we're trying to focus this discussion around SUVs.
Yeah, sorry guys.
But Ram has been mentioned several times, and I've been wondering this for a very, very long time. Why is there no full-size SUV from Ram?
Now, that's an interesting question. We actually went over this a couple times, and there's a couple things to keep in mind. One, there was a Ram SUV, which was available everywhere else but here, and that was I think they were calling it the Ram Charger as well. And it was just based on the Ram platform, but they also used some minivan components and put them in there, I kid you not. But recently, over the past, say, 10 years, there hasn't been anything out there. And what's interesting is that Ram was looking at their Dodge Durango, which, same family, and obviously the Jeep Grand Cherokee and the other Jeeps, because those vehicles really did comprise a huge chunk of the segment. And one of the things, this is a rumor, that they had an issue with was possibly competing within their own brand, and they didn't want to do that because they do have a 3-row SUV, and that is the Durango, and they do have a really hardcore off-road vehicle.
But is the Durango an SUV?
That's a really good question.
Because it's based on the Grand Cherokee sort of unibody platform.
Stretched out.
Yeah, so see, these waters are pretty muddy.
Yeah, they are indeed murky. Now here is the other part of that. Supposedly, they are looking at doing this with the next generation 1500 that is coming out possibly next year, but maybe the year after that.
Within a couple of years.
Yeah, and that's the buzz right now. Will it be a Ram 3-row SUV, or will it be the Jeep Grand Wagoneer that's coming out that's supposedly a 3-row giant SUV? Hard to say.
A lot of guys are asking for Goldmine Hill testing of either the Pathfinder or an Explorer, and right now it's snowed in. I mean, there's snow there, but more importantly, there's ice underneath the snow.
They wouldn't make it even a few feet.
And actually, we tested the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon recently, that with mud terrain tires, as you know from the factory, didn't make it because ice requires chains or, I don't know, tracks.
Good side beam or studs or something, none of which was on these tires. Now, if we were doing a tire test, actually that would be a pretty cool thing to go up the hill, but unfortunately we don't have the resources to do independent tire testing.
And we love doing off-roading in all kinds of all-wheel drive vehicles, so we will be doing a lot more of that, of course, in the future.
There's an old video of us with the newer Ford Explorer. Roman took it off-road, but that was a few years back.
We've done this, but we will do more.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. And the other thing I like doing is doing a little bit more towing. I mean, people are asking about iGauntlets. I also like doing efficiency tests on our highway because, of course, these vehicles are rated by the EPA on their fuel economy, but if you're towing 3,500 pounds, there's not a lot of information out there, what kind of efficiency should I expect?
And the environment we have here is really challenging because not only do we have the Ike Gauntlet that we can run up and down with a trailer, but we are always higher elevation than a lot of other places, and that usually puts extra strain on these vehicles. So it's a tough environment to test in. But think about it this way, if it does well here, it's going to do really well at lower elevation.
Yeah, and our MPG tests on the highway are mostly flat highway.
Mostly.
Yes, there's a little bit of an elevation change, but that's as level as we can find in Colorado.
It's about almost a 100-mile loop that we do each time. We mostly do it with trucks. Every once in a while we've done it with a few high-efficient vehicles. But we'll definitely keep doing that. It's a fairly popular thing that we do.
Johnny Chan is asking, what do you think about the new 2018 Ford Expedition that was unveiled in Chicago?
Well, we haven't had a chance to drive it, so all I can do is speculate. We already know that it's basically a Ford F-150 with, the ability...
Based on that, yeah.
Based on that. So that means aluminum, which is lighter on the outside. It means 10-speed transmission, and it means the new EcoBoost engine, all of which we've had some experience with, and those have all been very positive experiences. So I think going in, this is probably going to usurp what the Suburban can do. I have a feeling that they're going to aim for a much higher tow rating and possibly better MPG than the Suburban. All of those things are very positive as well. Ford's not screwing around. They're really trying to fight this battle, and it's a battle that General Motors has owned for years.
Yeah, they have, I think they have courage, because but what I mean by that is, when they make a decision, they execute on that decision all the way, and they basically changed the entire vehicle. There's no carryover parts here from the previous Expedition.
Right, even though it looks somewhat the same, or in terms of its profile.
But it looks like in the SUV family. They're kind of.
It's definitely an SUV, yeah.
Their styling, but it also has a knob for the transmission selector, which we'll have to wait and see how that works.
I'm not a big fan of turning the knob to shift into a gear.
So,
all right, a couple more?
A couple more questions. We have a couple more minutes, right?
Yep.
There are a couple of comments about, what is your favorite crossover, if you have to, or an SUV maybe? What would you say?
Crossover, I've never made it a secret that I like Jeeps because I like to go off-road. So in terms of the most capable off-road crossover, currently is the Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk, and the Renegade is a close second. They're both really good off-road up to a point. Once you get to a certain point, it's over. That point usually is big rocks or slippery rocks or heavy inclines. So I like those. Actually, my wife is very fond of the Range Rover Evoque. And that is a crossover. I mean, it truly is. And that's a really good vehicle for snow, and it can do some off-roading as well. So those are great ones. But, you know, every time I look at a crossover and SUV, I always think I can do that in a pickup truck. So because of that, I mean, the Ram Power Wagon is one of my favorites. What about yours?
I like technology, as you know.
Yeah.
I really like the Volvo products, especially
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
The XC90 that just recently came out last year. They nailed the interior.
Oh, it's
the
beautiful.
interior is absolutely beautiful. It has brand new sort of engine technology. I mean, they also have a hybrid now that just came out. I really love their design. I think they have some of the best designs right now in the Volvo family.
They're pretty good in snow.
Yeah, and the XC90, the updated version is coming out at the end of this year. For SUVs, I like big SUVs. I like towing. So GM SUVs are one of my favorites, like the Yukon GMC, especially the Denali.
Denali with the big engine?
Yeah.
That thing is
the
awesome.
6.2.
Yeah.
It's basically like a pickup truck with 3 rows of seats, and it can tow huge amounts comfortably. So that's what I would say. But we're about at the end of our show now.
Yep.
So
We got about 1 minute left. Gonna answer maybe 2 more quick questions. Now, if we shut down and you guys didn't have the chance to ask your question, wait until this actually loads up and
Publishes,
and then it'll be a video, and you ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them then.
Yep. So anyway, thank you. You can go to TFLcar.com for a lot of our crossover SUV discussions and stories. And if you care about trucks more, TFLtruck.com is there, of course.
That's right. Once again, we're here Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We actually tried to start a few minutes ahead of schedule. We didn't do that today.
All right, thanks a lot.
See you guys.
We'll see you soon.